was sort of this panel discussion, Stanford student audience, and one of the sort of the overarching topic was, where do we find the next Google? So it was sort of a similar version to your question. It was a little bit more direct, because we're interested in the next super big, super successful tech company. I think every moment in the history of business happens only once. The next Mark Zuckerberg won't be starting a social networking site. The next Bill Gates won't start an operating system. The next Elon Musk won't start a Tesla electric car company.
Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is where I try and boil complex ideas, concepts, or people's opinions down to the simplest possible form. I started reading Peter Thiel's new book, 0 to 1. It really blew me away. I very much recommend it. And yeah, this video is me trying to portray through him what his opinion is about billion-dollar companies and the future. Hope you enjoy, and if you do, consider sharing it on social media. It really helps me out. And yeah, I'm gonna try and keep it under 10 minutes.
Many years ago, many moons ago, Yahoo came to you, to Facebook this is, and said, we want to buy you for $1 billion. Mark said, no. You said, maybe. What happened?
Well, we had it was July 2006. We had a board meeting. It was myself, Jim Breyer, Mark Zuckerberg. The three of us were on the board. I think the two investors probably thought $1 billion would be pretty good. You know, with 40 million in revenues that year. It was not profitable.
So you wanted out.
It was still just, it seemed like a good financial deal. And Zuckerberg, it was sort of, we had a long conversation. It's a lot of money for you, Mark. You'd make about a quarter of the money personally. And I was like, well, I don't know what I'd do with a $250 million. I'd just start another social networking site, kind of like the one I have, so why would I sell it? And at the end of the day, he convinced us that they were still working on all these new product features that were not being valued properly. We figured Yahoo wouldn't go away. And we sort of ended up going with his judgment. But yeah, he thought it was going to be a 10-minute conversation to turn it down. It was a 6-hour conversation. But
Peter, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for joining us and talking to us.
For many decades, we've had this sort of narrow cone of progress in the world of bits, not so much in the world of atoms. And so it was good to be an electrical engineer or a software engineer. Most other engineering fields were actually bad career decisions for the last 40 to 50 years. So Silicon Valley, for the last 20, 25 years, has been very largely focused on the internet. Most of it's been the consumer internet. And the question you have to ask is, does that keep going? Is there a lot more to be done on the consumer internet, or does this broaden out? It's also been striking. So it's been incredibly concentrated on this sort of one, what I would argue, relatively narrow area. It's been very important. It's created some phenomenal businesses, but there are many other areas that have remained underexplored. And it's also been incredibly geographically concentrated. There was a talk I gave at Stanford University in spring of 2005. It was a panel with three of us on the panel. My friend Reid Hoffman, who had started LinkedIn, and Sean Parker, who was one of the early president of Facebook. And it was sort of this panel discussion, Stanford student audience, and one of the sort of the overarching topic was, where do we find the next Google? So it was sort of a similar version to your question. It was a little bit more direct, because we're interested in the next super big, super successful tech company. And I sort of said, well, you can't just type this into the Google search engine. This is an important question, but you won't find it by typing it into Google. And it's a really hard question. Obviously, if I knew the answer, I would tell you. But I'll give you sort of a partial answer. And the partial answer was that I thought there was a 50% chance that you would find the next Google within a 5-mile radius of the room everybody was in. And so that's only 1/1,000,000th of the surface area of the planet. So if we, 50% and you get rid of 6 zeros, that's a pretty good simplification, even though it was still a non-trivial search problem within a 5-mile radius. Now, I think unbeknownst to all three of us, all of us were involved, investors or employees at Facebook, probably the next Google was Facebook. It turned out to be 1.8 miles from that room. It was 1.7 miles by bike. But I've been as I've been thinking about it, if I were to try to answer that same question today in 2018, I think it would be, and it would take a lot more to try to explain his intuitions, but I would think it's much less than 50% chance that it's anywhere within a 50-mile radius, anywhere within the broader San Francisco, Silicon Valley corridor. It's not clear that it will be another consumer internet company. I'm not sure I'm quite as pessimistic as you, Maria, but I do share the suspicion that we're sort of 20, 25 years into the consumer internet and 10 years into the mobile internet, and so the good ideas were found pretty quickly, and perhaps most of those have been explored, and so there is a sense that the future is going to be perhaps harder to predict. It's going to be much more distributed. It will be areas outside of that, and so and you see this in the way people have been talking in Silicon Valley about all these different areas: artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, self-driving cars. I often worry that a lot of them are a little bit too much buzzwords and are somewhat exaggerated, but I think they reflect the sense that perhaps it won't be another app on the iPhone. It'll be something beyond the consumer internet, that we have to do new things. What are you doing that nobody else is doing? What ideas do you have that nobody else has? What great business are you working on that no one else is working on? And if you're a founder or an entrepreneur, you should always aim to build a monopoly where you're the only person in the world doing what you're doing. And I often think, this is a little bit extreme, but that there really are only two kinds of businesses in this world. There are businesses that are in crazy competition, and there are one-of-a-kind businesses that are monopolies. And I think it's always some combination of something that's an important problem, and often there's some reason people have a blind spot around it or aren't thinking about it. So I think I always like to get at it from both a sort of a foundational level, which is maybe some substantive area that you're really passionate about, and this sort of psychological level of why is this something that so many people are missing in one way or another. The word, already in the time of Shakespeare, the word ape meant both primate and to imitate, and imitation plays an enormous role. It's how we learn language as kids. It's how culture gets transmitted. But it also leads to a lot of insane behavior. It leads to sort of the madness of crowds. It leads to bubble-like behavior, which we've seen many in our society in recent decades. And so I think this challenge not to just reflexively imitate and to think for yourself is it's always very trivial to say, and it's always quite hard to actually do. There often are broad categories where you could say there have been social networks before. My friend Reid Hoffman ended up starting LinkedIn, started a company in 1997 called SocialNet. So they already had the name in the company 7 years before Facebook. Now their idea was that you'd basically have this sort of alternate virtual reality where maybe I'd be a cat and you'd be a dog, and we'd interact in cyberspace, and we'd have these different rules of how we'd conduct ourselves. And I think Facebook was the first one that actually cracked real identity. Was at its core about real people in a way that none of the others quite succeeded. Even MySpace was more. It started sort of in Los Angeles. It was about people pretending to be someone other than who they are, which is what people do in Los Angeles. Facebook started at Harvard, where it was sort of basically trying to get a map of real identity. So right. I think it was the first one to really crack that problem. And Zuckerberg was very passionate about it. The key point that Mark made was that there were a whole set of products that Facebook was still planning to build. So not just iterating, that it was planning to build that surely Yahoo was not valuing properly. And he was right. I mean, the future is never valued. Right. These things.
Today, did this just happen today on Twitter? Instead of starring or favoriting your item, it's now turned into a heart?
Yeah.
What is that about?
It's a few things. It's favorite as a superlative. So even since the earliest days, we're like, is this tweet really my favorite? Am I going to have to take some other things out of my favorites to make room for this thing? And so it's just a lower bar gesture. It's just a lot easier. And frankly, the Facebook guys pioneered the space of like, let's just make it as easy as possible for people to react to content. And like and heart is just much less of a commitment. So the Instagram guys showed that. You can double tap anywhere And basically on Instagram, double tapping doesn't necessarily say you're in love with that thing. It's just an acknowledgement even. So I'm proud of the Twitter guys for taking that step to make it easier today.